War had turned their village to ash and left them completely alone. 4 children, no adults, no food, no light, trapped in a cellar while the world above them burned. In 1944, in a small Belgian village called Banneux, a group of children vanished during the chaos of battle, only to reappear weeks later with a story so haunting few believed it was true. This is the untold story of courage, faith and survival, the forgotten miracle of the children of Banneux. In the rolling hills of eastern Belgium, nestled between thick pine forests and frost-dusted fields, lay the small village of Banneux, a place so quiet it almost seemed untouched by time. The year was 1944, and though the world beyond was in flames, Banneux still held a fragile peace, a kind of breath before the storm. The village was known not for wealth or size, but for its spring said to have miraculous waters and a modest stone chapel where villagers came to pray. Every morning, the sound of the chapel bell drifted across the valley, mingling with the smell of baking bread and the laughter of children walking to the schoolhouse near the old mill. Among them were 4 inseparable friends: Marie Lefebvre, 12 years old and sharp as a fox; Jacques Moreau, a quiet 13-year-old with eyes like winter sky; Elise, Marie's little sister, barely 9 but brave and curious; and Tom, the youngest, a boy of 7, who still believed that angels lived in the forest. They played in the meadows behind the chapel, weaving crowns of wildflowers, chasing butterflies and making small boats from bark to float down the stream that trickled past the stone bridge. Sometimes when chores were done, Marie would climb the hill beyond the spring and look out over the horizon, fields stitched with hedges, farms puffing smoke from their chimneys, and the thin line of forest marking the German border. Her father often warned her, "Never forget, child, peace is fragile, like glass. One stone and it shatters." But to Marie, the war felt far away, like a story told in whispers. Soldiers were something seen only in newspapers. Even when Allied aircraft sometimes thundered overhead, the villagers would pause, look up, and then return to their work, muttering, "It's heading east." Yet beneath the calm there was unease. The winter had come early that year, a cruel, steel-grey season that froze rivers and bit through wool coats. Refugees had passed through Banneux before, their faces hollow, their eyes haunted. They spoke of fighting in the Ardennes, of German forces regrouping, of battles so fierce the snow was stained red. Still, the villagers clung to routine. They believed that if they kept their faith, the war would pass them by. Children continued to bring water from the spring. The priest held mass each Sunday praying for peace. And at night, mothers hummed lullabies while fathers listened to radios behind closed doors, their brows furrowed. Then came December, and the first snow fell, soft, silent, and deceptively pure. Marie and Jacques built snowmen near the chapel, their laughter echoing between the trees. Elise gathered pine cones for the Christmas decorations, and Tom, with a stick for a sword, pretended to defend their little fort made from snow and branches. None of them could have known that far to the east, an entire German army, 250,000 men, was gathering for what would become one of the last great offensives of the war, the Battle of the Bulge. The front line was moving west, and with it came thunder. By mid-December, villagers began hearing distant rumbling, like an approaching storm. At first, they thought it was thunder. Then, late one night, the sky to the east flickered orange. Someone said it was a fire near Spa. Others whispered, "No, it's the front." The next morning, soldiers in muddy uniforms arrived, American troops, weary and frostbitten. They didn't stay long, only passing through, warning the villagers to be ready. "If you have somewhere safe, stay low. Things are about to get bad here." The children didn't fully understand, but Marie noticed something she'd never seen before. The priest locking the chapel doors in haste, her father hiding bread and tins in the cellar, and soldiers digging trenches beyond the meadow. By Christmas Eve, the bells did not ring. Snow fell steadily, cloaking the village in an eerie silence. The chapel stood like a ghost in the whitened landscape. Smoke rose from only a few chimneys, the rest too afraid to be seen from above. And then, on the morning of December 26th, as the children gathered to fetch water from the spring, they heard it, the deep, shuddering drone of aircraft engines. Marie looked up. Over the treetops, a formation of dark shapes appeared. German bombers flying low, their silver underbellies glinting in the pale winter sun. There was no time to run. The first explosions hit near the road, then the fields, then the heart of the village. The world of laughter, bells and spring water was gone in an instant. Banneux, the peaceful village, had become a battlefield. The air itself seemed to split apart. The calm morning shattered with the first explosion, a deafening roar that rolled across the valley and echoed off the pine-covered hills. Birds scattered in panic, windows burst outward, dogs howled. Marie fell to the ground, clutching Elise as a column of black smoke erupted near the church. The stone chapel, the heart of the village, shook violently, its bell tower splitting with a terrible groan before collapsing into a shower of sparks and dust. "Run!" someone screamed, but there was nowhere to run. German planes swooped low, their engines shrieking, releasing bombs that tore through houses and barns alike. The sound was like thunder trapped inside a cage. Snow and ash mixed in the air, turning daylight into a red-grey haze. Marie grabbed Elise's hand and shouted for Jacques and Tom. Through the smoke, she saw Jacques waving from behind the old stone wall near the Lefebvre house. He was shouting something, but his voice was drowned by the roar of another explosion. The ground buckled, a nearby barn burst into flames, the heat so fierce it melted the snow instantly. Horses trapped inside screamed, a sound that would haunt the children for the rest of their lives. "Come on!" Marie yelled, pulling Elise toward Jacques. She could barely see now. The air was thick with dust and falling debris. Tom stumbled behind them, crying, his small boots slipping on the icy ground. They reached the wall just as another blast tore through the road, flinging stones into the air like bullets. One struck Marie's shoulder. Pain seared through her arm, but she didn't stop. Not when everything around them was burning. The Lefebvre home, her home, was gone. Flames poured from the roof and smoke billowed from the windows where her mother had once stood, calling them in for supper. Marie's breath hitched, but she knew what her father had said once. You can't help the dead, only the living. Her father had gone days before, with the local resistance group to warn the Allies about German troop movements. She hadn't seen him since. Now, as the bombs fell, all she could do was keep her small group alive. "Where do we go?" Jacques shouted, his face streaked with soot. Marie looked toward the small hill beyond the spring, where the old wine cellar stood beneath a burned-out farmhouse. It was built of thick stone, half buried in the earth, a place her father had once said would survive anything short of the world ending. "There," she pointed, "the cellar. Go!" The children ran. The snow was red with reflected firelight. Pieces of burning wood fell from the sky like rain. They weaved through shattered fences, past the bodies of fallen livestock, through the acrid smoke that stung their lungs. Every step felt like a race against time, a heartbeat away from death. Behind them, the church bell, cracked and half buried in debris, gave one final hollow clang before falling silent forever. When they reached the farmhouse, its upper walls were gone. The roof collapsed inward, but the cellar door was still visible beneath the wreckage, half covered by snow and splintered beams. Jacques pulled with all his strength, and the door gave way, groaning open to reveal darkness below. "Go! Go! Go!" Marie cried. Elise went first, followed by Tom. Marie and Jacques slid in last, pulling the door shut, just as another bomb exploded somewhere nearby, shaking the earth like a heartbeat of fury. Then darkness. The air was thick and still. The only light came from a single candle stub Marie found near a crate. Its flicker revealed the stone walls, the barrels and the shelves, lined with broken jars and bottles. The cellar was cramped, musty and cold, but it was still standing. For the first time since the attack began, there was silence. Only the distant rumbling echo of war remained. Elise began to cry, soft, choking sobs that she tried to muffle in her coat. Tom huddled next to her, trembling. Jacques sat down heavily, rubbing his arms, trying to catch his breath. Marie's own heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She tried to stay calm, to think like her father would, find food, find warmth, stay quiet. She looked around. There were a few sacks of potatoes, some jars of preserved vegetables, a tin bucket and an old wool blanket. Not much, but something. Outside, the world continued to burn. By nightfall, the explosions had faded into the distance. Snow began to fall again, slow and silent, covering the ruins of Banneux in a blanket of white, as if trying to erase what had happened. Inside the cellar, the children huddled together. They did not speak for a long time. The candle flickered low. Every creak of the old timbers made them flinch. The smell of smoke still clung to their clothes and hair. Finally, Marie whispered, "We'll wait here until it's safe," but none of them knew what safe meant anymore. Above them, their home, their village, had been reduced to ashes. No one knew if anyone else had survived, and deep in the snow-covered ruins of Banneux, 4 frightened children had just begun a battle, not against bombs, but against time, hunger, and fear. The first day after the bombing passed in a blur of silence. When the sun rose, its light barely reached through the cracks in the cellar door. Dust still drifted down in lazy spirals, and the smell of burning lingered like a memory that wouldn't fade. Marie woke to the sound of Tom crying softly in his sleep. His small hands were clenched around a piece of wood, part of a broken toy soldier he'd found in the cellar. Elise was curled up beside him, her breathing shallow, her blonde hair matted with ash. Jacques sat near the door, listening, always listening. "Do you think it's over?" he whispered when Marie stirred. She shook her head. "I don't know," she said, "but we'll wait. Just a bit longer." Outside, there were no more explosions, no planes overhead, only the slow, eerie quiet of a world that had burned itself out. The occasional thud of distant artillery echoed faintly, like a ghostly heartbeat. They decided to take stock of what they had. A half sack of potatoes, some canned fruit that had miraculously survived the blast, a few jars of pickled onions, and 2 loaves of bread so stale they could barely break them apart. A small jug of water sat in the corner, left by whoever had once used the cellar. "That's not enough for long," Jacques muttered. "It will have to be," Marie said. She tore 1 loaf into 4 pieces and handed them out. "1 meal a day, until we know what's outside." Elise bit her bread quietly. "Do you think Mama and Papa are looking for us?" she asked. Marie froze for a moment before answering. "I think they're safe. Somewhere. And they'll come when it's over." But she didn't believe her own words. Not really. As the hours passed, the cold grew sharper. The cellar walls wept moisture, and their breath hung in the air like mist. They wrapped themselves in the old blanket, taking turns sitting close together for warmth. At night, they heard strange sounds, not explosions this time, but the groaning of collapsing timbers, the distant crackle of fires still burning above, and once, faint footsteps. Marie held her breath, clutching Elise close. "Do you hear that?" Jacques whispered. The sound came again, a slow scrape like boots dragging through debris. Then silence. Whoever, or whatever it was, moved on. When morning came, they dared to open the cellar door just a few inches. Smoke drifted in thin and grey. The light outside was dim, filtered through layers of ash and snow. The landscape was unrecognisable. Blackened skeletons of houses, the twisted frame of the church, and trees stripped bare as if scorched by a storm of fire. They didn't climb out. Not yet. Marie shut the door again, sealing them back into their fragile cocoon. By the 3rd day, hunger gnawed at them. Tom cried for his mother, his voice hoarse. Elise tried to hum a lullaby to calm him, but her voice trembled. Jacques busied himself with useless tasks, stacking old bottles, checking the cellar walls for cracks, anything to keep from sitting still. Marie tried to stay strong, but her mind kept drifting to her father. She imagined him trudging through the snow, rifle on his back, still believing his children were safe in their beds. She whispered to herself, "He'll come. He has to." On the 4th night, the candle finally burned out. Darkness swallowed them whole. For a while, no one spoke. The sound of their own breathing seemed too loud. Then, from outside came a faint rumble. Not bombs this time, but something else. Engines. Jacques pressed his ear to the cellar door. "It's tanks," he whispered. "They're back." "Whose?" Marie asked, heart racing. He didn't answer. The sound grew louder, then faded again. It was impossible to tell whether they belonged to retreating Germans or advancing Allies. The war above them raged on, unseen but terrifyingly close. On the 5th day, they ran out of bread. Marie rationed the potatoes next, cutting each into thin slices and boiling them in a dented tin pot over a candle flame. The smell was faint, but it lifted their spirits for a moment. Tom even smiled. That night they sang, softly, almost in whispers, a French lullaby their mothers used to hum. When the world was still kind, it reminded them that somewhere beyond the smoke and rubble, there was still life, still hope. But by the 7th day, exhaustion began to blur the edges of time. Jacques had grown quiet, his face pale and hollow. Elise's cough worsened. Marie's arms ached from holding them all together, physically, emotionally, desperately. When another night came and the cellar filled with the sound of wind howling through broken walls, Marie looked up at the ceiling and whispered, "Please, someone find us." And far above them, through the thick blanket of snow and ash, a faint sound answered. A single gunshot followed by a shout in English. They froze. Jacques looked at Marie, eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" Marie nodded. Hope flared inside her chest for the first time in days. "Someone's out there," she said. But the voice faded again, swallowed by the storm. For now, the children of Banneux would have to wait a little longer in their underground world, half buried in silence, half alive with fragile hope, not knowing that salvation was drawing nearer with every passing hour. For hours after that faint gunshot echoed through the ruins, none of the children slept. They sat huddled together, wide-eyed in the dark, waiting for another sound, a shout, a footstep, anything. But the only noise that reached them was the wind moaning through the shattered world above. By morning, frost had crept down the walls of the cellar, like ghostly fingers. Their breath came out in clouds. The last of the potatoes had been eaten. The little candle stub was gone. Even the air felt heavy, filled with the faint metallic scent of smoke and rust. Jacques rubbed his hands together, his skin pale blue from cold. "We can't stay here," he said, voice cracking. "We'll freeze before anyone finds us." Marie hesitated. "And if the soldiers are still there? What if they're Germans?" He didn't answer immediately. His eyes darted toward the cellar door, that frail wooden barrier between safety and the unknown. "We can't tell," he said at last. "But if we stay, we die for sure." Elise looked up, her lips trembling. "I don't want to die down here," she whispered. That decided it. Marie found the courage she'd been fighting to keep buried. "Then we go." Quietly, just far enough to see what's out there. Jacques pushed the cellar door open a few inches, and blinding white light flooded in. Snow had fallen heavily overnight, softening the jagged edges of the ruins. What had once been the village of Banneux now lay under a quilt of white and grey, smoke curling lazily from the husks of homes. The silence was eerie, beautiful almost, the kind of silence that comes after great violence. They climbed out one by one. Their boots crunched on the crusted snow. The air was so cold it burned their lungs. Elise clutched Marie's coat as they stepped over a fallen beam. Tom stumbled, his small legs trembling. Jacques moved ahead, scanning the ruins with sharp eyes. In the distance, beyond the scorched church steeple, a trail of footprints led into the woods. Not animals, human and recent. "Look," Jacques whispered, "someone's been here." Marie's heart leapt, but she forced herself to stay calm. "We'll follow them," she said. "But if we see soldiers, we hide, understand?" They nodded, and so began the slow march through the frozen graveyard of their home. For nearly an hour, they walked through what had once been Banneux. They passed the charred remains of a bakery, where loaves of bread had turned to ash mid-rise. The schoolhouse roof had collapsed inward, covering the blackboard in snow and soot. They said nothing as they walked. There were no words left. Then, from somewhere ahead, came a muffled sound and the unmistakable low growl of engines. Jacques froze and dropped to one knee. "Down!" he hissed. They ducked behind a fallen wall, hearts pounding. Through the swirling snow, dark shapes moved, armoured vehicles crawling up the road like iron beasts. Marie's breath caught in her throat. She squinted through the fog. The shapes drew closer, and then a miracle. The vehicles bore white stars on their sides. "Allies!" Jacques whispered, almost in disbelief. "They're Americans!" The children stared as a column of trucks rolled into what was left of the village. Soldiers in thick coats jumped down, rifles slung over their shoulders, scanning the wreckage. One carried a Red Cross armband. Another shouted orders in English. Tears welled in Marie's eyes. "They came," she breathed. "They really came." She stood to wave, but Jacques grabbed her arm. "Wait, we don't know if it's safe. What if—" Before he could finish, Elise stumbled out from behind the wall, crying out, "Over here, please!" The soldiers turned, weapons rising. Then one of them, a young medic with a scarf around his neck, saw the small figure in the snow. He shouted something to his comrades and ran forward. "Children! There's children here!" Moments later, the four of them were surrounded by soldiers. The men's faces softened when they saw how thin and pale the children were. One knelt beside Elise, wrapping his coat around her shoulders. Another handed Tom a chocolate bar from his pocket. The boy clutched it like treasure. Marie tried to speak, but her voice broke. "We were hiding in the cellar," she whispered, "for days, maybe weeks." The medic shook his head in disbelief. "You're lucky to be alive," he said softly. "Most of this town, it's gone." Jacques looked around at the ruins, his jaw tightening. "We know," he said quietly. One of the soldiers pointed toward the road. "We've got food, blankets, a field kitchen a mile from here. You'll come with us?" Marie nodded, tears freezing on her cheeks. For the first time in what felt like forever, she let herself believe they were safe. They rode in the back of a supply truck through the ruins, wrapped in army blankets. The road was lined with burned-out tanks and shattered trees. Every few minutes, the sound of distant artillery echoed across the hills, but this time, it didn't make them flinch. As they left Banneux behind, Marie looked back one last time. Smoke rose from the ruins in lazy curls, disappearing into the pale sky. She thought of her parents, of the home that once stood on that hill, and whispered a silent goodbye. The soldier beside her noticed. "Was that your town?" he asked. She nodded. "It was." He smiled gently. "You'll see better days, kid." War doesn't last forever. Marie wanted to believe him. She closed her eyes and leaned her head against Elise's shoulder. For the first time in weeks, she slept, a deep, dreamless sleep filled not with fear, but with relief. The truck rumbled along a snow-covered road, bouncing over frozen ruts and patches of ice. The children huddled together beneath coarse army blankets, surrounded by boxes of supplies, ammunition, fuel, tins of food marked in English. Every now and then, one of the soldiers riding in the back would glance their way and offer a smile. They couldn't speak much French, but kindness needed no translation. As they passed through the countryside, the world unfolded like a battlefield map. Fields of white and black, trees shattered by shellfire, barns reduced to skeletons of wood and smoke. Yet here and there, signs of life emerged. A farmer leading an emaciated horse, a child waving from a broken window, a church bell hanging crooked but still standing. The convoy stopped near a crossroads lined with makeshift tents. The smell of diesel, firewood and coffee filled the air. An American flag fluttered weakly in the wind. "This is Camp Mercer," one soldier explained in slow, careful French. "You are safe now. There is food. There are doctors." Jacques helped Elise down from the truck, her tiny fingers clutching his sleeve. Tom stumbled beside them, too weak to walk straight. Marie followed last, blinking against the sudden brightness of daylight after so many days underground. They were led to a medical tent where warmth greeted them like a forgotten friend. A nurse in a white cap ushered them to a table, her eyes soft with sympathy. "You poor darlings," she murmured. "We'll get you warm and fed and clean." She handed each of them a tin cup of hot milk. The steam rose like ghosts of comfort long vanished. Marie took a sip. It burned her tongue, but she didn't care. It tasted of home. Later, wrapped in clean blankets, they sat near a small stove. A doctor came by, examining each one gently. "Malnourished, frostbite on the fingers," he muttered in English, "but they'll recover." Jacques, though weak, sat tall when the doctor asked his name. "Jacques Fontaine," he said clearly. "From Banneux." The doctor nodded and wrote it down. "Brave boy," he said softly. When it was Marie's turn, she hesitated. "Marie Duval," she whispered. We don't know what happened to our families." The nurse's smile faltered. She touched Marie's shoulder. "Many are still missing. The Red Cross is helping. We'll look for them." But Marie could tell from the woman's eyes that she didn't expect much. Still, it was enough. A thread of hope to hold on to. That night, the children were given cots inside a heated tent. The wind outside howled like a living thing, but for the first time in weeks, they slept in warmth. Marie dreamed of spring, of green meadows and bells ringing in the distance. Elise dreamed of her mother's voice singing softly. Tom dreamed of bread, real bread, fresh from the oven. Only Jacques lay awake. The images of their ruined village still burned behind his eyes. He listened to the muffled sounds of soldiers talking, laughing, living, and for the first time, He let himself believe they might actually have a future. Days turned into a week. The children grew stronger. Their cheeks regained colour. Their laughter returned in small, hesitant bursts. The soldiers, hardened by war, took to calling them the little ghosts of Banneux. One morning, an officer approached Marie and handed her a letter stamped with a red cross. It was written in French. "Your village is being cleared by Allied engineers. Survivors are being relocated to Liège. You will be transported there soon." Marie's heart raced. "Liège," she whispered. "Maybe someone we know?" Jack grinned faintly. "Then we'll find out." 2 days later, a truck took them toward the city. The journey was long but peaceful, the thunder of war now distant. As they approached Liège, the sight made them gasp. Rows of brick houses still standing, shops reopening, people walking again. Life, stubborn and unbroken. They were taken to a repurposed school where other refugees were being registered. Marie scanned the crowd, searching faces, heartsick with both hope and fear. And then suddenly, a cry. "Marie!" She turned. A woman was running toward her, hair streaked with soot, eyes brimming with disbelief. Marie's world stopped. "Maman!" They collided, arms locking tight. Marie sobbed against her mother's coat as if her heart would break. Jacques looked away, tears welling in his own eyes. Elise and Tom watched silently, until another voice called from the crowd and Elise gasped, "Papa!" In that moment, the world felt right again. By evening, all 4 children were reunited with family members who had survived the chaos. Mothers, cousins and uncle. Jacques' father was still missing, but he refused to give up hope. As the sun set over Liège, the children of Banneux sat together one last time on the school steps, wrapped in borrowed coats. The air smelled of bread and smoke, but also, finally, of peace. Marie looked at Jacques and smiled. "We made it," she said. He nodded. "We did." Above them, church bells began to ring, soft, slow and full of promise. The nightmare had ended. The children of Banneux were no longer the lost souls of a ruined village. They were survivors, proof that even in the coldest winters of war, the warmth of hope can still endure. Spring came slowly to the Ardennes that year. The snow melted from the fields like sorrow, leaving a tired heart, and the ruined houses of Banneux began to rise again, brick by brick, window by window, in the careful hands of returning villagers. Among the workers, laughter sometimes echoed where only silence had lived before. Children ran once more across the muddy lanes, and life, stubborn as wildflowers, bloomed again from the ashes. Jacques Fontaine stood on the slope above the village, older now, his shoulders broader, his eyes sharper with years that had forced him to grow too fast. He watched the builders work on what was once the Duval home. Smoke rose from the chimneys again, a sight that had seemed impossible only months before. He carried in his hand a small rusted tin cup, the same one Marie had used to scoop water from the cave. It was dented, nearly useless, yet sacred to him, a relic of the days when 4 frightened children clung to one another against the darkness. Marie still lived in Banneux too, now helping the nuns at the nearby chapel that had survived the fighting. Her mother, though aged by grief, tended to orphans displaced by war. She often told them, "You are stronger than you think, stronger even than fire and fear." She would glance at Marie as she said it, and the girl would smile quietly. Tom and Elise were taken by relatives to Liège, where their father found work in a railway yard. Tom, once frail and pale, grew into a lively boy who could never sit still. Elise became a nurse, vowing that no child under her care would ever face hunger or cold again. Time moved gently, like the slow turning of the seasons. In 1947, the villagers of Banneux gathered for a ceremony, the unveiling of a simple stone monument beside the rebuilt church. It bore no grand inscriptions, just a few solemn words. To the children who endured, and to the hope that never died. Jacques and Marie stood side by side, holding candles that flickered in the spring breeze. Behind them, the villagers bowed their heads in silence. The church bells tolled once, twice, the same bells that had survived the shelling, their cracked tones now softened with forgiveness. When the priest finished the prayer, Jacques whispered to Marie, "Do you ever think about the cave?" She nodded. "Every time it rains, I still hear the drops, but I also remember the light when the soldiers came." He smiled faintly. "Maybe that's how it is." The dark stays, but so does the light. Years passed, Europe healed, though the scars of war never fully vanished. The children of Banneux grew into adults, their memories fading at the edges like old photographs yet never truly gone. Jacques became a teacher in Liège, known for his quiet patience. He often told his students stories of courage, never naming himself, never boasting, but teaching through parables of ordinary bravery. Marie became a nurse like Elise, travelling to war-torn villages long after peace was declared, helping rebuild what bombs had once destroyed. They kept in touch all their lives, two souls forever connected by the memory of a dark cellar and a candle flame that refused to die. In 1975, a Belgian journalist researching forgotten stories of World War II visited Banneux. He came across the monument near the church and began asking the villagers who the children who endured were. Old women pointed him toward a retired schoolteacher in Liège, Jacques Fontaine. When the journalist arrived, Jacques welcomed him into a small home filled with books and photos. He listened patiently to the young man's questions before answering with a small smile. "It was a long time ago. We were children, frightened, hungry and very lucky. But if you write about us, don't call us heroes. The real heroes were those who never stopped believing the world could be kind again." He paused, then added softly, "Write instead about hope. That's what kept us alive," the journalist did write. A short article published quietly in a provincial paper. It never made international headlines, but in Belgium, it became part of local law. Teachers told the story to school children each winter when the snow began to fall, of the four who hid in a cave when the world around them burned and lived to see the dawns. Each year, candles still appear beside that small monument in Banneux, placed by hands young and old. No one knows exactly who leaves them anymore. Perhaps families passing through, perhaps children whose grandparents once whispered the tale at bedtime. And when the church bells ring through the valley, the sound carries a message older than war and stronger than fear. That even in the deepest darkness, love, courage and the will to survive can light a way home. In the silence after war, the children of Banneux grew up, not as victims but as symbols of hope. Their story reminds us that even in the darkest hours, light can still find its way through the cracks. If stories of human courage and forgotten history inspire you, you'll love what's coming next. Join us again for another incredible true story that time almost forgot.